Basically, I'd like you to start from the beginning and just kind of tell your story about when you came to Montgomery County Public Schools in 1999. What did you find, and what was it that made you think early education was the way to start?
In 1990s, before No Child Left Behind, before a lot of the state accountability, and before the disaggregation by race or by socioeconomic, we started our reform here. And Montgomery County is a community of about 1 million people. It is one school system for the county, which makes it rather large. It's the 16th largest system in America. It was changing demographically because of where we are located next to Washington, D.C. We were getting a high degree of immigrant population and a high degree of population who were affected by poverty and who had high mobility patterns. Coming into a community that had been stable and had a great reputation, mostly a white bedroom community that worked for the government that was built after World War II, those were rapid demographic changes. And the system had gotten up to about 120,000 and then slipped back to about 90,000 and then was regaining enrollment, and it was about 123,000 at that time. But the enrollment was different. It was more mobile, more poor, and certainly more diverse. When I took a good close look at the district, I found that there were actually two districts. One was a district heavily impacted by poverty, race, and mobility, and heavily impacted by the numbers of kids that didn't speak English. And if I looked at it as a district in and of itself, while it encompassed less than half of the territory, it encompassed over 75% of the poverty, 75% of the race that we had in the entire system. And it was about the 53rd largest system in the United States. So had that been treated alone, it was just almost a total Title I system that was totally impacted by poverty. But it was surrounded by a system that was some of the most wealthy, affluent areas in educational attainment, both in wealth and socioeconomics in the whole country. And that was masking it. And when they were averaging the scores together and pointing out the little hero-shero programs, what that was doing was hiding this large urban center in the middle of a county of 1 million. So we were asked to do two things. And one of them was to keep children progressing through and stretch every child. They had a program called Success for All. We took a look at it and thought, well, that sounds good, and everything on paper sounds good, but it really wasn't targeting at the highest level. So we got together a really wide segment of the community and really did some GIS, geographic information systems, put it up on maps, and it really stood out real clear that we had what we called a red area, because we would graph it in, and it was an area impacted by the poverty, the mobility, and the socioeconomics, and also impacted by race, and a green area, which was high socioeconomics, high performing, and almost no poverty or mobility. And we said, what could we do for both of these? After about 10 or 15 community meetings and a lot of dissension and a lot of discussion, we found that one, there were 4 or 5 things that would bend the trend, and we called them trend benders. A good teacher in every classroom that was well trained, a targeted outcome, and we chose college ready because that would appeal, and so that was the raise the bar. And then taking a look at how the participation rates of the children who are impacted by these poverty and mobility, educational load we called it, what they needed was earlier starts. And they needed a more, not only a great teacher, but they needed an early childhood teacher, because that became the close the gap. So it was raise the bar, close the gap. And with them, it was starting earlier, watch how you're using time. We found out that they'd just been throwing money at it. They had about 10 or 12 different textbook series. Some of the poorer teachers that we had in the system somehow migrated to that area because, so it was resource plenty, but no standardized curricular pattern, no really organized methodology, spotty early childhood. Kindergarten was half day like it was in the wealthy area, and really no organized methodology.
So could you describe the points of your early success plan?
So we put together, because one, we knew that with the, we had to prove ourselves. They had had a study in this district where they got rid of full-day kindergarten. They had had it, but they run into an economic thing, and they got rid of it down to only 9 full-day kindergartens. But when I went out into the wealthy areas, they had what they called a kindergarten complement. So the parents were paying for the other half of the day, which the poor parents could not afford. First thing we did was standardize the curriculum across. And when I mean standard, I don't mean low standards. I mean, what does it take to be college ready? So we brought in some organizations, internationally recognized and nationally recognized, like Phi Delta Kappa, and many organizations. Take a look at our curriculum. Look at the standards. Were they internationally competitive? Did they lead you to college ready? What we found is there was really no good standards because the country had resisted standards. So we banked our curriculum off of AP Calculus, Advanced Placement Calculus, and Advanced Placement English for the math and for the science and for the language arts. And then back mapped, or what you call reverse engineering in the business world, all the way down to, and then we borrowed some statements from Rick DeFore. What do you need to know and be able to do in kindergarten, preschool, first grade, second grade? Then we went back in that time zone and found out how do we compare to what you need to do to hit the standard. And we found out that our more affluent area compared very well. Well, that's why it had a high graduation rate and a high college participation rate. But our area impacted by poverty, standards were non-existent. There was no way to measure progress, and the teachers weren't even trained to teach reading in kindergarten, let alone assess it and do some diagnostic prescriptive work. So once we found out where we were heading, kind of a North Star, back mapped, reverse engineered, it became, well, we can't get rid of all the teachers. What do we need to do? And we joined with our unions in professional development. What does the teacher need to be able to know as an adult? To teach reading, to teach writing, to teach math. At what level, and then how do they diagnose and differentiate when they're working with each individual child? Because what we found was a secret of parental involvement was you needed to tell a parent something. A didn't tell them anything. You needed to tell them something about their child, progress against some standard that led somewhere. So we needed to not only make our standards congruent and coherent, they needed to be predictive. They need to be able to be explained. And when we did that, we started to see parental involvement. And then we figured out that you actually could break it down where the child would know how they were doing. And they could do some self-diagnosis. And so these children were starting to carry around little notebooks, and we got into the Ball Ridge, the whole continuous improvement. So it was a combination of professional standards that drove better professional development, that drove a more coherent, cohesive pattern all the way up through grade 12, that became predictable, that became diagnostic. We found out there were no diagnostic tests for little kids. You can't give them group standardized tests, that just wouldn't work. So we had to build our own individualized metrics that led somewhere and actually predicted something. And we borrowed a lot of things from Murray Clay and the reading recovery, and we taught everybody how to utilize running records. And then we started to set the trajectory. Okay, you needed to be able to read at level 3, for example, in kindergarten by first semester. Now we have that trajectory at level 6 by first semester. So each year we've gotten better, and the proof of the pudding is when you look at these kids that we started with in reform, They're now sophomores. They're just coming in their sophomore year. Well, let's look at how they've done. They were like a bubble going through a hose, you know how it will just move on up. Everywhere they went, the scores got better. So out of kindergarten into first grade, I heard first grade teachers threw away their lesson plans because the kids already knew the first grade material. They had to go up, up, up. So as these children moved through, we were able to massively change the curriculum, and we have 10,000 kids approximately for every grade level. Every grade level changed with these children. And so then we started to develop our metrics of predictability and lace them in with the national metrics. So we know what a early childhood needs to do. We did a pincer plan. We went down to early childhood and up to third grade. And when we went down to early and we started with kindergartners, our pivotal point went both ways. When we did that, we were able to see quick demonstrated results. We were worried about them tailing off. So we had to go into third through eighth grade and then adjust that standard 9 through 12. Now, after 10 years of reform, we've got it down to a high degree of predictability, and we know that if you do at level 6 in reading, second grade, you ought to be able to hit level 16 in first grade. You ought to be able to hit level N in second grade and score above the 50th percentile on the Terra Nova 2. That's our introduction of our first national test, so we don't get overcome by our own brilliance. And parents really know something, and it's more granular. Then we translate into the No Child Left Behind, which came through after we started our reform a year or two. And at the third grade, you're scoring at proficient or advanced proficient. 4th, 5th, 6th. By 8th grade, you're in algebra or before. And we're now up to the reform kids, 70% of them taking algebra or greater and passing, which translates into Algebra 2, which translates into advanced placement, which translates into better SAT scores, which translates all together in being college ready.
Now, going back to the very, very beginning,
Yeah.
Two key elements of the early success plan have been full-day kindergarten as well as introduction to pre-kindergarten.
A lot of people think time just is going to make a difference. Time, if you're doing the same thing, won't make a nickel's worth of difference. Having a target that is aligned is the key component, and it's got to lead somewhere. It does no good to say just I'm going to put full day kindergarten in. You have to say full day kindergarten to do what, and if you did accomplish the what that you're putting forward, how does that translate to the next level? Will it stick, and will it build cumulatively, and does it really make any difference when you hit 8th grade, 11th grade, graduation? Does it get you college ready? That's what we did. We developed a trajectory that will get you college ready and is predictable. That's no good just using time and having the trajectory if you don't have a diagnostic set of tools to determine where an individual child is at with regard to that trajectory. That's no good. You can have your walls plastered with all of that, but so what if the teacher can't remediate? You know, it's one thing to know what an arm looks like that's healthy. It's another thing to have an x-ray to know it's broken, but then you got to figure out how do I set this? And what is the least painful way to set it that will cause it to heal quicker, faster, better? So it goes in conjunction with not only knowing what you're trying to accomplish, the target, but then being able to diagnose it, and then being able to do something about it in the teaching and learning situation that is both cooperative with the child themselves and the teacher, and then help from the outside with the parent and community.
Now, this is a very involved reform plan.
It is.
Imagine there were many challenges along the way. What were some of the key challenges?
Us, ourselves. You know, I've been in education for 40 years, and a lot of times people are waiting for some guru to come in and tell you what to do. Larry Lazat or Madeline Hunter or Jim Comer or, you know, somebody like that. This was all about us being retrained. getting the skill sets and the beliefs and the attitudes that we could do it. We faced the biggest pushback the first year from our own teachers about what was developmentally appropriate. Frankly, we had to send some of them a few other places in the world to show them that children could actually learn to read in kindergarten with a great deal of success. In fact, whole countries actually believed that. In '99, our people didn't believe that. So that was one of our big pushbacks. The next one was the use of diagnostics. Very scary to teachers. You had to win their trust because the diagnostics weren't about gotcha, which they're used so predominantly for in our country. They're about diagnosing and helping and telling you something that will help you help the child. So we started some rules with our diagnostics that I think are very important for people to know. One, you got to get off the gotcha mentality. Do they tell the teacher something? Do they tell the child something? And can they be interpreted for the parent where the parent can tell, not only learn something, but be part of the cooperative team? If they do that, we use them. If they are just to reinforce the political structure to show that we're making progress, or the monetary structure to show that your money is well spent, well, that's fine. We have to do some of that. But those are not the key components. If they don't tell the child, they don't tell the teacher, and they don't spur action with them and the parent, then we try not to use them.
Now I imagine, you operate you operate your own school district here,
right.
But you operate within a larger system of federal and state policies. Are there any ways in which policy could be altered or better explained in order to help?
Well, I've been a big one since I've been a big one since the 80s and 90s on national standards. Felt pretty lonely out there, but I see more people growing. I looked at the under-industrialized countries of the world, and they all had national standards. So if you don't know what your end outcome is, what do you want when your 12th grader graduates? You don't know how to do this, what I call back mapping or reverse engineering. So I think the biggest helpful thing that we could do at the federal government, we've put tests in, and we've put, No Child Left Behind in. I think if you put the right standards in, it'll drive everything. Because what will happen is then you will have communicated. They could be voluntary. They could actually be voluntary. And here's a way to measure these standards. So those two things, here's the standard and here's a voluntary way to measure them. And then if states want to have standards that are different from that, you can see if they are using lowball standards by them having to produce a standard and compare it to your national voluntary standard. I think it will cause them to go above it. Now that will drive the curriculum. That could be left to the states, because you're going to have a curriculum is a body of knowledge that you want somebody to know to meet this standard. And yes, they can make different assessments, but here's a national voluntary assessment that could measure it. You have to show us or prove to us as the federal government that your standard can be measured. And then I would put it under our scrutiny. Does it tell the teacher something that prompts action to do something different? Because that will drive the training. Because if it shows out that there's something wrong, for an example, I broke my arm, the x-ray shows it's broken, that prompts the doctor, or in our case, the teacher, to actually have to do something. And then I think we can get along the road. We did that in pre-K to 3. Again, the success is shown and borne out now by our reform effort. Our children are already past 8th grade. They have beat every test along the way. Now this is running against a lot of years of children who were not as impacted, as I said, mostly Caucasian, mostly upper social middle class. We are dealing with much more poverty, much more diversity, and are breaking the record scores because these kids can demonstrate as they move through that the early childhood education filled in that achievement gap by replacing it with the opportunity to have a coherent curriculum that was standards-based, that was delivered by an expert professional that could diagnose and prescribe and differentiate your changes in a way that kept it fun, enjoyable, and give you predictability of a pathway that would lead you to college ready. And we're seeing kids get on it all over the place.
Now, I've read through some of the data that proves the success of the early success plan. But you said earlier that it's the teachers that were giving.
Teachers are key.
First,
if there's a silver bullet,
what are they saying now?
They're very happy with it. I mean, most of us, when we go down to the gym the first time, have some concerns whether we can do it. We're worried about being in a gym with other people who have been exercising a long time. So it is an attitude shift. It is a belief shift. But the proof that motivates teachers is in the diagnostics. If you can show them that they are adding value, and you can show them that that value does translate for that child to be able to go somewhere, it makes a kindergarten teacher feel special, or an early childhood teacher to feel special when they know they had that child on a track for college ready. They know that it can be measured, and they know they put them there. When you do that, you have increased extrinsic and intrinsic motivation and made the professionalism come back into our profession. Because diagnostics are important, coherence is important, but the real importance is, what do I do with what I now know about this child? That's where the art of teaching comes in.
And I imagine now, with a more aligned curriculum and standards, teachers are talking to each other more.
Well, you have something to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
If you have such variability, such looseness, you don't want it too tight where it's prescriptive and direct instruction. You don't want it too loose where everybody's all over the place and it's not coherent. You have to run a balanced approach. Then you're going to get more professional discussion about how to help that. In fact, what we did to ease the pain is that in every one of our buildings we put professional staff developers, embedded the staff development coaches, if you will, and used the coaching concept. They were non-administrative. They didn't evaluate. So as a teacher, you could say, look, I got this and I don't know what to do. So that was our original step to encourage the participation and the communication. We then started to do scheduling where they could be with each other. We then started to encourage that by putting another layer in of a professional who was also an evaluator, a consulting teacher. So now you had the consulting teacher that could come around building to building. They weren't stationed to building. You had somebody that you could turn to at your level, and you had your principal. So and then you had a chance to communicate. And then you had that organized. And then you were constantly in training about how to diagnose and how to skillfully accelerate. And then we layered in accelerated summer school where it became invitational. Not, oh, you failed, you don't go. We layered in a chance to go to kindergarten before you went to kindergarten in the summer. A chance between kindergarten and first grade to get the preview, because we found that was a good accelerant. So all of these things combined together gave you the proper mixture. And it isn't just the full day kindergarten. It isn't just the teacher training. It isn't just the materials. It is the combination of all of these things that are individualized but coherent, lead you somewhere, can be diagnosed, encourage communication, and built upon the strategy that your teachers are your best delivery system. And they need coaches and support just like students to constantly stretch them. And the diagnostics have to be there, and they have to be meaningful, but they have to tell you something about teaching and learning.
I know how we're doing on time. I don't want to use up too much of your time, but one maybe final question is, say another one of your superintendent colleagues from campus, Independence, Kansas, called up and says, Dr. Weast, this is really impressive. I'd like to replicate this in my district. There's so much to do. What is the first step?
First step, I'd ask any superintendent that calls me, where are you going? If you're wanting to just get AYP, call somebody else. If you're wanting to get your children college ready, this is the right approach. Because we already know in wherever state you're at what it's going to take to enter college. First, it's more expensive, and second, it's pretty high. So can you take that knowledge and then reverse engineer it in such a way that you can see whether your rigor or the strength of your program is present in preschool and kindergarten and first and second grade? If it is it present in all your locations, or do you have variability? Do you have it with your poorest kids as well as your richest kids? Don't just show me your hero sheroes. Is it systemic? If it's systemic, do you have a way to accelerate it through your diagnostics that are more fine-tuned to tell you something about an individual child? If that's the case, is there evidence to convict you of training teachers on a constant basis to improve their processes and their ability to do skillful teaching in such a way that continues to raise this? If you have all of that, is it linked from grade to grade where you have a continuous value chain? If that's the case, can you prove both by your local, state, and national tests that each of your layers are not only connected, but are predictive? And if you can do all of that, you'll start getting not only a higher graduation rate, you'll get a higher preparation rate, and your children, people come from all over to seek our children to go to their universities. Even though it's hard now, it really pays off for them.
And I imagine a second question that same superintendent on the phone might say is, well, I really want to do exactly what you're doing, but it costs a lot of money.
We figured out it was
cutting our...
Everybody talks about this cost, and all across the country, and I've been a superintendent now for 33 years, 80% or more of your costs are driven by your personnel. So it is the same in a small district or in a large district. So what kind of personnel do you have? What kind of skills do they have? And how are you putting it down? And if you really want to do this really well, the cheapest way to do it is invest in early child education. You get a much better bang for your buck. It's much easier to get them on that trajectory and keeping on that trajectory. And what we found is that trajectory is like rolling thunder. It just rolls up every time. And we've had to strengthen our curriculum because these children, as they moved up, they were the vanguard of change for all of our curriculum systemically across the district, and the children behind them were actually able to do better because every year we've gone up in in all grades.
And when you say 80% of costs are in personnel, you're saying that it's best to invest in...
It's best to invest if you've got 8 out of every $10 going into one area of your budget, and that's people, you better invest in people. And you better invest in people to do what? Be better at what they are trained or have been called to be. So you need a coherent pattern for them, a structure that enables them to communicate, feedback loops so they know what they're doing right and what they're not doing right. They need structures to help them improve, and all of that has to show up right in the classroom.
Is that your red-green map?
Yeah, that's my red-green map. We differentiated. Each of these little areas is a school, an elementary school, and we differentiated. And what I found was interesting is there's where more than 75% of the poverty was. You can see the area is much greater in the green area, but half the kids were here and half the kids were here. Poverty concentrates. And when you try to do the same thing here as you do here, you're going to get differential results. So what we did is run it like one district, so we had one outcome, college ready for everybody. So it is a matter of giving these children access plus equity. And equity is you differentiate the instruction. We run smaller class sizes in here. We have highly trained teachers in here. We have a very coherent curriculum in here, but not prescriptive or not too much direct instruction, although we start that early, but it tails off as they get older. And in here, we try to keep building size down. In here, we try to really concentrate on early childhood education. What we found is they didn't move out here or out here, they moved around in here. And so a lot of people talk about mobility, but it's generally mobility within the district. What we did in here then is access to the highest level with the equity, doing things differently, and the same level of rigor as we had out here. And over time it worked. But you better start with preschool. You better start having an aligned curriculum. You better have standards that actually lead you somewhere that you can diagnose. You better have teachers that can prescribe and differentiate, which are different issues. And you better have leadership that cause people to want to stay in these buildings. And you better make the job doable. Class size, coaching, professional support. And you better open it up to communications where people can communicate with each other and can share ideas and best practices. And you better allow children and teachers from out here to come in here every once in a while. Because when they get whining out here, I just say, well, you know, if you really think it's tough here, you know, if you got 23 and they got 15, maybe I can just put you here. And doing all that together, what we have now is a performance level in here that is equal to out here. And both of them are hitting college ready.